I have never seen it like this in all the 20 years I've been doing this. Candidates market, it's in favor of them rather than there is a lack of talent. So people do have a lot more choices.
If you find that person, you better hire them. Don't hesitate. If you say you want them and you're ready to make a hire, you've got to do it because the market is not waiting and people have lots of options. Welcome to another episode of Oratory. This time, you guys have the MRC team coming at you live. And so we are ad-libbing a bit today, as well as having a few conversations. We'd like to focus on the idea of some trends that we're seeing in the market, as well as some best practices for both our candidates and clients. So welcome to our episode, and thank you for being here. I will start with our traditional question, which is, what is getting you guys excited right now about the work that we're doing? Who wants to answer?
Go, Sam. I'm excited because I feel like the market is changing usually it feels like feast and famine with mining and with recruiting. Like we've had years where it's like famine, we've had years where it's feast. This year, it feels like it's starting to balance out and that companies are making a lot of like intentional good hires, like more thinking about their hiring process, because I feel like in feast years when it's just going crazy, they don't really care. They just want bodies and seats. And then in famine years, they're like really picky. But I feel like because the market is like pretty steady, that they're like making good decisions, making intentional decisions, really thinking about their processes. So it's not going like too fast or too slow. It's just like really nice. That's what's making me excited.
Heather, what about you?
I agree. I feel like too, the market for really great employees is tough right now. If you find that person, you better hire them because don't hesitate because there's a lot of good people out there and some are looking, some aren't. But when you find it, you better snatch them up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, Samantha, your comment about like the cadence of the market, I feel like we're a little imbalanced, to be honest. I feel like things are starting to happen a bit fast, but the decisions are happening slower than they should. And so with that, I find like that leads into Heather's comment where it's okay, if you say you want them and you're ready to make a hire, you've got to do it because the market is not waiting and people have lots of options because we have projects finally coming online. I was talking to somebody the other day and he said 8 new projects in Arizona. I think that there's something similar in Alaska. Idaho has clearly got a few things cropping up. I think there's just a lot happening. And I'm forward looking crystal ball, but not having a crystal ball. I think that when we look at all the projects going through Fast 41, the next big ask is going to be project teams. And there are not a lot of people who have started new mines in the U.S. And that leads us into a whole nother conversation that I'm eager to have with you guys about individuals that require sponsorship here in the U.S. to do work. And so whether it's Canada or Mexico or like people from other countries, it isn't easy to go through a visa process. And lots of clients don't have the details that they need to do it. And so usually the answer is like, prefer somebody here. But I think as we look at building project teams, we're going to have to look outside our borders. And some of that may actually result in some cost savings rather than looking at people who have done this over and over here in the U.S. and have inflated base salaries. So anyway, that's my rant about balance and imbalance and all the things. But what shifts do you guys think we're seeing in like the candidate market?
You want me to go first? I think that the candidate market it's definitely like a candidates market. It's in favor of them rather than there is a lack of talent. So people do have a lot more choices. Heather said, if you find a candidate that you want, you need to make them an offer and you need to make them a good offer or they're going to walk. And I think with that shift, candidates are more thinking like, what do I want? Is this a good project to work on? Is this something that I want to spend my time on? And it's no longer just about who has the highest salary. It also has to feel good to work there. It has to be an exciting thing to work on rather than just like, this company is offering me the highest salary. And with that, it has to be the work-life balance as well. So we're seeing a lot of candidates that don't want to move or relocate, which historically in mining, you were a miner, you moved all over the country and that was just part of your lifestyle. And that's not the case anymore. And people are being more picky about that. And they want more remote work and they want to stay where they're at.
Yeah. Interesting. You have these same conversations. I just talked to a younger gentleman with 3 kids and I said, you have to have this conversation with your family to make sure this is what you want to do. And they're really having to think about it. But I agree with one of your statements, Sam, where you said people want a good place to work. It's not like they're, like you said, they're not just following the salary. They want to know the team they're going to work with is good. The people they're going to work with is good. Of course, the company's good, but I'm seeing that more where it's like more about, am I going to click with this group of people? And I want to work there and I want to stay there.
And I think people are feeling more empowered to have the conversation and interview the company as much as the company is interviewing them. And I think that's just something we've seen evolve over the last few years. But I think people now practiced it a few times. And so I think that's something I'm definitely recognizing, like the advocacy for themselves as a candidate, what they're asking for, how they're asking for it, and what they expect as a base priority, culture, etc., from the companies that they want to move to. And I know that we've all talked about this, and I feel like a broken record because I feel like we're talking about people relocating and that being really difficult for the last maybe close to 2 years at this point, where there's a lot of resistance for it. And I think I have worked in this industry for quite some time. And when I first started, it was like housing crisis and everybody couldn't move. It was like 2006 or so, and the housing market had collapsed. And so we saw some resistance at that point, but they figured it out and they still did it. So they'd be like, listen, this is really radically inconvenient, but I still need a job and I can't sell my house, but like now I'm going to go rent, or I'm going to rent this house. And they figured it out and we moved anyway. 20 years later, I'm seeing the idea that now we have more dual income households. So we have spouses that are both working, not necessarily in mining. They're considering their kids' schooling at a higher degree. Before they were like, we'll just move the kids. And now they're like, they're in 7th grade. And if it was in pre-6th grade, we could do it. We don't want to interrupt that. And then the housing situation where we had some people have low interest rates and they don't want to deal with moving or whatever other pressures and uncertainty that we're facing at present. It's just really compounded the lack of desire to relocate. And I have never seen it like this in all the 20 years I've been doing this. So
That's most of the rejections that I get are,
yeah,
I'm not willing to relocate. But we also have to consider the role. There's certain roles that you could potentially work hybrid, but not every role. There's roles where you have to be at the mine site. And I feel like those people know that and they understand that. Then their expectations are different. You know what I mean? But definitely, I'm constantly getting back. Thank you. It sounds like a great job, but I'm not interested in relocating.
or this isn't the right time for my family, whatever that looks like. And even when I think we've seen a few instances that we get halfway down the pipe and then they start looking at real costs of what relocation is and what's been offered to them. And all of that becomes real rather than a maybe, then it like, oh, pump the brakes. This might not be the right move for us. And so I think that's been a really interesting thing to watch. The other thing that we're talking about and that I wanted to point out was that I had a client who sent me 2 articles recently about job hugging, and we put them in our last newsletter. But now I'm like obsessed with this idea where people are leaning into their roles, not necessarily because they love them, not necessarily for any reason, but they're just, the devil is better than the one you don't. And I think we've also noticed that people are staying in roles because of the unknown of what's out there. And so I know that you guys can comment on that. It's a big, broad question, but have you seen that as a reason also people are not willing to look other than relocation? They're just going to stay?
I think the world is very uncertain right now. And I think mining has also been very uncertain. And there was a time when you would like move and you would stay with a company 10, 15, 20 years. And that's not the case anymore. People are moving jobs every 3 to 5 years. And with that uncertainty, like people are, they don't necessarily love their job or what they're doing, but they also don't like the idea of something unknown and being unstable. There's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot going on in mining, and we're seeing like mining fluctuate, and there's all this money. But I feel like anyone who's been in this industry long enough, we know that there are ebbs and flows, and we might be on the top of the hill right now, but like, when does it start going down a hill? And people are like, I'm just going to hold tight, especially more senior level roles, because they're like, I don't know, I have 10 more years left in me and then I'm going to retire. So why move? Why go to a better job when I know that I'm good here and I'm safe here?
Yeah. See, I think opposite, because maybe it's the role that we're working on. I have a lot of people who are going, I'm unsure because these certain things are happening in the industry. And not only that, I went through 3 or 4 different bosses in the past 3 years, or there's just, for me, I feel like what I've been seeing is people going, okay, I'm more unsure about the role I'm in currently, and that's why I'm looking at making a change.
Yeah.
And for them, they want to change where it's something more stable.
Okay.
Yeah, reliable.
Yeah. I think
we're all looking for that stability, and it just depends on, is the stability staying where you already know, or is stability like searching outside because you see the company that you're at not being stable?
Yeah. I think that the idea of trust is really important, and it's hard to develop that quickly, but we're seeing that both companies and candidates are driving towards that. Can we trust one another? How we work together? How we manage through uncertainty together? And when you're speed dating, for lack of a better reference, right? When you interview, you've got 3, 4, maybe 5 chances, depending on how long you make your interview process, to get to know somebody pretty quickly and build that trust and rapport. And I think that is the part that they want to feel very quickly. And it's hard to build that fast. And so from my perspective, I think this is why we see people want to work with others from similar companies that they've been at previously, or accepting referrals, or all of these things, because it's safe, it's comfortable, it's known, it's trusted. And while our job is usually to introduce people from that they don't know, I find it really surprising at times that they're like, we'll bring them somebody that they perhaps worked with 10 years ago. I'm like, oh, thought about that person. But that's the person that they then move forward, because there's that sort of foundation of understanding between the two of them. I think that the two things that I'm consistently reminded of as we do this is that people want to feel that trust implicitly between both sides, and that now we're leaning more into like intention. And even at the junior end of the spectrum, I think that some of these junior candidates coming to the market are thinking about what they want to do and how they want to contribute and the companies they want to work for. And I find that really interesting, because when I first started, I felt like people that were early career would just say yes and go figure it out and learn it and hate it, love it, move forward, whatever. But I think that idea of being intentional across the board, people are certainly doing that. And also in their hiring practices, being very intentional about who they add. So that's my 2 cents about that. Moving into a different area that we alluded to really early in our conversation, as part of relocation, as part of what we're seeing in terms of trend, I don't think that we can do our audience justice if we don't talk about some of the international candidates living in the United States who are very interested in opportunities but require sponsorship. And this is, like we said, been an issue because, it's work to deal with the visa. It's money to deal with the visa. But we are seeing droves of international candidates be interested in opportunities and get passed over. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are you guys seeing in terms of applicants, interest, qualifications from our international sort of pool of candidates in the U.S. that far that?
I can tell you that we always see a ton of international candidates. And in years past, we automatically let them know that we can't help them. A lot of companies up till probably this year that I know of, like, we're not willing to do sponsorships. Only like really large companies were willing to sponsor. Any mid to junior level company was not willing to do a sponsorship. But now I have noticed that a lot of the international candidates that are living here have a much different culture and idea of what work looks like and work-life balance. And they are willing to do things that Americans are not. And that includes like moving across the country or making decisions without their spouse or making decisions. Who cares if we're moving the kids, even if they're in high school, where American culture, those things are really important. And those things are things we're thinking about. But the international candidates those are not important issues to them.
Heather, yeah, I think
Yes.
we definitely see a lot of international candidates, and I honestly appreciate talking with them. And there's so much talent over there. Like we were talking before, there's so much talent out there, and I almost feel bad because we don't have the opportunities to provide them with the work. As I haven't worked with a company that is willing to sponsor, go through sponsorship, go through the pain of the visa and all that. Yeah. I think, which, like I said, I think is disappointing because there's so much talent out there. So much. Yeah.
I also think there is stigma that sponsoring a candidate is really expensive and tiresome and a long, lengthy process. And that's not always the case. A lot of these visas are really easy to obtain. They're fairly inexpensive. But I just think that we've been told and had it like banged into our head that these are really complicated, expensive processes. And so don't even bother with them. And now that we've actually had to like, okay, you don't have any other choices. Let's look into what this entails, what this process looks like. And most of the processes are really straightforward and fairly inexpensive as well. And like definitely worth the cost that you save in yearly salary as well. Like a lot of times these people, even with the cost of sponsoring a visa, these companies are still saving money on that candidate.
I agree. There's so much talent out there. And I think that while we have great mining schools and people coming out of them and talent here, there's not enough. There's not enough to go around. And I think we're going to continue to see that, like we said, especially as things accelerate in the mining industry and new projects come online. And so cutting our teeth a little bit on how to navigate a visa process, I think should be something that we at least can have conversations about. And I think we're learning more and more through our systems and even through our clients. We have a client right now, and Samantha's been working with them for a year or so at this point as they're growing. And I spoke with their CFO and she said, look, we have done 6 different types of visa sponsorships this year. And she said, I had no idea there was all of these options, and really at a cost that was very manageable. So it does require paperwork. It is an intentional decision to move forward with that. But there are lots of immigration attorneys that are accessible. I'm happy to help do referrals with that if we have clients or people that are interested in looking at that, because it is hard to navigate if you've never done it by yourself. But there's lots of places where you can get resources and figure this out. And so I would just encourage people to think a little bit outside of the box, because you're fishing in the same pool all the time. Sometimes you run out of fish, right? So we got to go to a different pond and look around. So I think that is really important to just be considerate. But also, as we're talking about people and companies being intentional, as you utilize talent from different backgrounds, it changes your culture. And just like any hire changes your culture. But I think that the idea of creating systems internally to be responsive, to create safe workplaces, places where people feel included and can belong and show up to the table and really do their best work and stay becomes the next challenge that you get to navigate. And so I think that this is predominant in smaller organizations when one person changes things pretty radically. In larger organizations, I think some of that's refined a bit and people can camouflage between various groups. But we often work with a lot of small groups and companies, and each hire makes a big difference on what the culture looks like.
Yeah, and I would love to add to that a lot of these hires are really unexpectedly talented and have incredible brains. And the company that you were talking about, they recently hired someone. He was from Africa. He went and did his PhD in Japan and then came to the United States. And when I was doing his references, obviously I saw his resume, but I didn't put any of this together. When I was doing his references, one of his references was someone who had gone to school with him in Japan. And he was saying he had to not only learn English, which was not his first language, but then he had to learn Japanese and be able to defend his dissertation, all those foreign sciencey talks in his third language. Can you imagine what I feel like in America, we are really ignorant to that and foreign languages and the talent that takes. But when I was doing this reference, I was thinking oh my gosh, we put these kind of stigmas on these people that they're less than, but most of the time that he was doing a PhD program in a language that was his third language, which was mind blowing to me that I didn't even think about until it was presented to me like that. So I think that
with the win of that, I'd make it through a PhD program in English training.
Yeah,
that I think resilience and grit and the ability to work through cultures is huge. And we stand to gain so much by learning from one another. And everybody actually is very different when we start talking about whether it's international talent, whether it's somebody that you've never worked with before. I think that in a market that's as tight as it is presently, that we really have to work a little bit on our unconscious bias and our ability to have conversations that we don't always know how to navigate as fluidly or as comfortably as we have in the past, right? And ask the questions and say, okay, how can we work together? How can, this be something that we navigate from a visa process, from culture process, from whatever it really looks like? And it's different, but I think we're going to be faced with that more and more. So, I think there are lots of tools and lots of people and conferences and other ways of accelerating that growth curve. And I think we have to lean into it, right? We get to have these conversations every single day. But I will tell you that yesterday, I told Samantha this earlier, but yesterday I had a conversation. This is an entry level role for a mechanical engineer. And it's been really difficult, to be honest. And this guy's background looked interesting. He sent me a really nice note. I said, okay, do you have time for a call today? And he's sure. And so I sent him an invite. It was an hour later. And I was I'm being an asshole. I should not have done this. But it was just, to me, an informal chat. He prepared a PowerPoint presentation for me. He customized to the job, talked through all of this stuff. He was so enthusiastic, he was very prepared. And I'm just doing my normal thing. What's going on, blah, 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 having the conversation. He's Miss Lindsey, I would really like to stop you for just a second. No disrespect. I developed a presentation for this interview? And I was what? And he gave it, and it was so great and totally blew me away. He's from India and has been here for 2 or 3 years and finished a master's degree and is looking for his next challenge. And I said, you're here, and would you be open to relocation to this place? And he said, I would love to see more of the U.S. And he was very transparent. It was just a really fun conversation. And the level of preparedness, as I said, I've apparently been doing this for far longer than I'd like to admit at this juncture. But in the course of 20 years, not one person has ever created a custom presentation in probably less than an hour that I will then ask them for a call. And so this guy blew me away. And I think the desire to learn and grow and push forward and be prepared is such an amazing thing to see to me. And so for us to be able to advocate for candidates that are putting that much into it, we talk to lots of people every day, and I'm not suggesting that every candidate need to prepare a presentation for us. I think it's really nice occasionally to have these outliers that do stuff like this. But it certainly makes me reappreciate what we get to do and the folks that we get to talk to and how we advocate for them for roles moving forward.
Yeah. I'm sure when you got off the phone, like, you were like,
I literally would like
excited.
I was so excited. I smiled. I've told everybody. I told Casey. I told Samantha first thing when we got on the phone. I'm like, this guy is amazing. And he may not be 100% fit for this role, but guess what? I'm calling our client today and being like, listen, this person is fabulous and you should at least have a call with them.
Yeah.
I think we're a little hard to wow because we have so many conversations. Even when people say thank you, hey, thank you for letting me know I didn't get the job. I hate telling people they didn't get the job, but like when they are really gracious about it and they're like, thank you so much for rejecting me. I'm like, I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think we all, what we do and the people we get to talk to, we wouldn't be doing this, but
Learn something new every day. I do.
every day.
But I also
For sure.
learned how intertwined everybody is. I talked to this
Oh my God.
name. I'm like, oh, you work for a company that Husband works for, but in a different context. And then we started talking, and then I was like, weird.
When I think like I'm talking to somebody brand new and then things like that happen, I'm like, okay, there are times where I think, man, this industry is it's so much bigger than we think. And then I have a call with like totally a one-off and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Actually, my cousin started that company and like I worked with this guy there. And I don't even know how these things come up, but we're all very interrelated and it's wild to see. And sometimes it's just taking the time to have those more nuanced conversations rather than having a script. Something I know Heather and I talked about this recently, and I said, I think each of us has a different style in terms of how we interview, how we engage with our clients. I think there's a baseline for expectation of how our work is done. But then there's the ability to like really shine and be yourself throughout this process. But I said, listen, I think I've done this for too long because I don't feel like I know how to interview anymore. As I say, this is a podcast where clients and candidates are going to listen. And, you know, what in the world, what are you doing? But sometimes I need to check in and realize that I've decided that I don't know how to do this anymore because it just becomes something that's just so inherent in what I do every single day that now I don't think it's a skill. But sometimes really important to have the conversations internally for us to say, how are you thinking about this role? What are my blind spots? And I think you guys did that yesterday on a role. Or how am I interviewing or what's working for you? I just said, apparently I really like what candidates are excited and prepare. And that's like really gets me excited. What's something that candidates or clients are doing for you that's allowing you to find either enthusiasm or check in with yourself and say, oh, I should change the way I'm doing this, or I know I'm doing this really well. What does that look like for you? That's a big, long, rambling question, by the way. You can answer whatever part you want.
So I think that I always try to do it differently because I always think, okay, did I do that? Was I good with that? Did I do that? Like I try to mix it up a little bit. Like sometimes have a little bit of a script, sometimes keep it casual. But I guess the point is I always feel like I have to like really make sure, are you a good fit for this role? We're going to have a couple different conversations. I think what I'm seeing now with candidates is been super great, open to listening to what you have to say. If you're like, your resume needs redone, or they're able to take that, but it's almost like you're having a conversation with a friend versus,
Yeah.
that's how I like that. And I think when it comes to clients, and Lindsey, only who I'm talking about, we have one client and so much information that was so useful on this call, one of the initial calls. I was blown away afterwards. I was just like, this gives me everything that I need to be able to provide really useful information to the candidate. So then we can engage in a really good conversation about what this role really looks like. I thought that was super great. And I think you have that ability when you're focusing on one role But when you're focusing on 8 different roles, it's hard to be that specific, but it's really nice when you get that.
I agree. And I know what he's talking about. I also think this has to do with the ability to partner. If a company looks at us as a company as an extension of theirs, our ability to represent them, talk fluidly about their company, their team, their roles, what they do, that trust, that extension of them allows us to be successful on their behalf, because we get to have much better conversation and then talk to them and say, these are all of the things that we're seeing. This is what doesn't feel right. And sometimes we've all done this. We've all had a candidate in the hopper that then we're like, you know what? After this conversation, I don't think that's the right fit. Let's pull them candidate. But that only happens when we're allowed to have really good conversations, friendly conversations, open conversations with both sides, candidate and client. And so we walk a really interesting fine line between the two. And that sometimes is hard, especially when we get to the end, right? When we have to negotiate. And Samantha just had this where we have a very clear idea of what the client wants, and we had a very clear idea of what the candidate needed. And we got to an offer and had to help smooth the rough edges until they got to the finish line, and they did it. But that only happened because everybody maintained a level of trust and allowed other people to speak up and talk about the difficult things or give them some insight on what the blind spots might have been. And so, Smooth, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but that's interesting.
I think it's a fine line, and I feel like not in this case, but in other cases we've had where they're like, why are you helping the candidate negotiate a higher rate, or why are you helping them negotiate these things? Because you're working for us. But it's our job to make sure. I say this all the time. I was in a sorority in college, and we always had, when we went through recruitment, we always said it's a mutual selection process. Like, you're picking us and we're picking you. It has to fit. And I say that with, this is how recruiting works too. And if we're not helping the candidate to feel like they're valued and they're wanted, then they're not going to start the job with those, like, with that in mind. And for this particular thing that Lindsey is starting, they ended up coming to where the candidate wanted, but it took a lot to get there. And we were worried that it was going to sour the candidate's experience. And it ended up all working out because everybody did trust each other, and that we trusted that we wanted the best for that client and for the candidate, because we don't want the candidate to start and then 60, 90 days from now, even a year from now, they're like, this is not what I wanted, and I got coerced into this, or I got talked into it, and it's not a good fit. We want it to be a good fit for everyone. And I think that's where we really value, like, the recruiting process and making sure, like, I want every candidate that gets placed by us to be like, wow, that was an incredible experience. It was so helpful. They walked me through everything. And then someday when they're in a position where they're hiring, they're like, I'm going to call MRC because I know they're going to give everybody a great experience.
These things that get rejected.
It go out to partnership, like you said, Lindsey. Having a partnership and trust.
Well, I will say that a huge chunk of our business actually comes from candidates that we've rejected, which is a wild thing to me. I wish I did a better job of keeping track of that over the last 20 years, but there have been so many people that I have rejected that have come back and said, listen, now I'm building a team. And even though I was not the candidate that won, like, I would still like to work with you because they understand the process from start to finish, even though they didn't get the job. And I love that so much because it's an interesting way of developing a relationship with somebody. Of course, there are far fewer candidates that make it to the finish line than the ones that we get to talk to, right? Because it's a funnel. But I think it's really interesting. That has been something that continues to be front and center for us.
I think maybe we changed the language on rejection, because it's not like we were rejecting them. Were you? Yeah, it's not like we were rejecting them because they weren't talented or like a fit. They just weren't a fit for this role. And like sometimes that's a protection. I had a conversation this morning. I immediately got on the phone and said, I know you're interested in this, but I think you're too qualified for this role. But let me tell you about it and you can decide. And then in the end, we ended up talking about lots of different things and where he's at. And he was like, had a better understanding of the market and what's out there and where his value lied. And I think that's where you build trust, when you can tell people like, this isn't a good fit for you, or this candidate is actually not a good fit for you. We just did that with a company where they liked this candidate. They were going back and forth, but it just wasn't a smooth process. And they were really trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And we were the ones who were like, listen, I think we're trying to force this and I don't think this is the right candidate. Like, we will find you someone, but don't be desperate. Let's not try to make this work when it's not going to work.
So we're nearing the end of time. I wanted to do quick, few, fast things. One of the things that I have noticed, sometimes we have clients and they have really specific roles. I feel like all of our clients have very specific roles, but let's go with like highly technical, very specific mandates. And we find people, but there's a reason that they're not going to fit and the process takes a little longer. And we've had a few that have said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that this is taking so long for us to pick somebody. Like, we don't want to be a bad client for you. Like, we don't want to be labeled as like a pain in the butt client. And so just like you said, Samantha, I find it really interesting. We have clients that are trying to be so considerate and say, oh, like, we should just pick somebody. Never just pick somebody, right? It is mutual selection. Like, this has to fit. And so that blows me away. But any other random things that you guys find surprising recently in terms of candidates or client interactions?
I think
Not really anything new and surprising.
with something surprising, definitely.
I learn something new every day and I'm surprised every day.
Right now, but yes, I think you're going to have at least one surprising thing happen to you once a week, because that's just the nature of the business.
And people, right?
Mm.
People are people. Okay. Anything else we should talk about today?
We could all talk forever, but
Yeah.
I know that we can. Okay. If you could give one tip for clients but even if they're not a client, if you could give a tip to a company on how to improve the hiring process, what would it be?
Ooh, I have it. So I was thinking about this morning. In a role that's a replacement role, instead of just replacing that candidate, I think it's really nice to reflect back to maybe why whoever was in that role left. Even if it's a simple thing of like they just wanted more growth, why couldn't you give them more growth? Why couldn't you give them what they were looking for? And I think a lot of times we're just in this, oh my gosh, we have to replace this candidate. Work has to move on, that we don't reflect back on what improvements can we make, because I think all these hires should be a learning process for the company to make their culture and their company better. So I think I would say definitely take inventory and reflect back on what can you do better going forward.
What piece of advice would you give to candidates looking for a job so they could do better?
I think they got to be open. They need to be, they got to be open to new things. They got to listen to what you're telling them. And number one, I think sometimes people are just like, oh, hey, I'm just talking to you because I'm interested. I think I might let's really if we're going to really get into this conversation, tell me really why you're interested. Commit to what you want to do and believe in it. Because I had a candidate who really thought he knew what he wanted, but then he realized what he thought he wanted wasn't really it. And he figured it out, thank gosh. And all I had to say was one little thing to him, and he was like, thank you, Heather, that makes so much sense.
Awesome.
And then I was like, yeah, it goes back to several things that we talked about. Don't just take something, but think about the whole thought process about what you want to do and where you want to be, and make sure it's all a good fit, right?
Yeah. Heather's she's not just a career coach, she's a life therapist.
I love that. So the one thing that I would say to candidates is have the hard conversations early. Money, relocation, issues that come up with family, big questions that you're worried about asking. If you need guidance on how to have those conversations, we're happy to have those with you if you're not being represented by a recruiter. If you are being represented by a recruiter, have those hard conversations with us. This is a safe place. This is a judgment-free zone. I think we need to know, what does this look like for you to take another role? What are you anxious about? What are you excited about? Do you have a goat that requires special hay that like you can't find anywhere except the western slope of Colorado? Yeah, there's all levels of weird, and we're used to dealing with it. And let us just help you navigate that, rather than finding out about it at the very end stage where it looks reactive and not that transparent. And so have the hard conversations early so that you can weed it in, weed it out.
I think back to Lindsey is, I know we're not their life coaches, but tell us the important thing, and don't wait till you get into an interview and tell people these weird ass things. I'm sorry.
We just had that where I had the conversation with the person. We were good on salary. We were good on everything else. He got an offer, and then he came back with all these weird requests of things that he wanted. And we were, okay, why wasn't this brought up in the beginning? And he was like, I didn't know you were supposed to do that. So it was managing that process for everyone, because then the company was like, he's asking for a lot now. And this guy's, I didn't know when to ask for it.
Yeah. The thing that I've thought of for years is like a manual for like success, for what to expect, how to navigate all the stuff, both for candidates and for clients. But because people are people and every situation is so different, it's so hard to write that whole thing out. And I haven't done it, but like maybe that would be my next big task. But even just something that helps people navigate forward might be a good thing to think about. Anyway, so we have about 2 minutes, and I think we've covered plenty for today. But turns out we're going to do this quarterly, and I like to torture my team and make them do podcasts with me. We will be back sometime in June with
I think you're
version of this.
only when you torture. Yeah.
I enjoy it.
We must do this in person. The next one in person in June.
We could do it in person because we're supposed to all be together in Spokane in June.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us. Thanks for your support. If you like our podcast, you can rate us. If you don't, then move on. It's on Spotify and Apple and YouTube, and I think some other places. But thanks for listening, and we'll look forward to having you again. And thank you guys for being here.